Hi, I'm Randy Nelson. I'm the off-road technical trainer for Polaris Industries, and today we're going to install a Pro HD 4,500 pound winch with rapid rope technology on this Ranger 500. Before we begin, we want to make sure we read the instructions and check to be sure all the parts and the tools are accounted for. Please retain the instructions for future references and parts ordering information. So on the table here, you'll see that I have the parts that are included with the winch kit. The only item here that's not included with the winch kit is this power cable kit. Some Polaris vehicles are already pre-wired with this cable kit. Some vehicles are not. Our Ranger 500 here is not, so we had to get this kit separately. Before we start the installation of the winch, we want to make sure we shift the vehicle into park, and we turn the ignition key off and remove the key from the vehicle. So we're going to go ahead and lift up the seat on the vehicle, and we're just going to go ahead and remove the seat from the vehicle itself. We'll just put that in the back bed. And then we're going to go ahead and disconnect the battery to remove power from the vehicle during the installation. We always want to make sure we disconnect the ground cable first, the black cables. So we'll go ahead and unscrew those. And you'll notice that there actually is a battery tender wire on here, so that's what this extra wire is. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to reinstall the bolt back in to the battery so we don't lose it. And we'll go ahead and disconnect the red cable. And we'll do the same thing for the red cable. We'll go ahead and reinstall the bolt back into the battery terminal, into the nut, so we don't lose it. So we're going to go ahead and remove the front bumper assembly from the vehicle. The bumper assembly is held on by 7 bolts. There's 3 across the bottom, 2 on the driver's side and 2 on the passenger side that we have to remove. Those are going to be a 13 millimeter bolt head. We also need to remove the front grille. So that's going to be a T40 Torx. So we're just going to go ahead and remove the grille first before removing the bumper. And the grille does not need to be removed to remove the bumper, but we do need it to be removed later on in our installation steps here for the winch. There are no nuts on the back side of these bolts, so nothing to worry about there. So we'll go ahead and remove the 2 bolts on the passenger side, and then there'll be 2 on the driver's side. So we'll get those removed. Again, there's no nuts on the back side. We want to make sure we retain these fasteners when we go to reinstall the bumper on the vehicle later on. So we're going to go ahead and open the hood up. On either side of the vehicle, there's some rubber latches. Just got to pull down on them and release the rubber latch. We'll do the one on the other side also. And then the hood just tilts forward, and then it comes down to a resting point. So our next step here is we're going to go ahead and remove the drive shaft cover. There are 7 T40 Torx screws around the outer edge of this cover. So we're just going to go ahead and remove those Torx screws, and then we're going to remove the cover from the vehicle. And lastly, we'll get that last one out. And we'll go ahead and remove the cover from the vehicle. And we'll set that aside. We want to make sure we retain the T40 fasteners we just removed from that cover, because we will be reusing them again to put the cover back in the vehicle. So our next step here is we're going to go ahead and install the battery power cables. The battery power cables are going to be routed from the bus bar to the vehicle's battery. So we're going to run them from here, follow the main harness of the vehicle straight down, and then it's going to run under that prop shaft cover we just removed with those 7 fasteners. So we're going to start off right here. You don't have to, but there are nuts on here. Instructions are going to call out not to fasten this to the bus bar yet. But what I like to do is actually remove the nuts and then put my cables on here and put the nut on there, just finger tight to secure it in place. That way when we're routing the cable through the body of the vehicle, we don't accidentally pull the end through the vehicle at the same time. So we'll just loosen up these nuts. These are an 8mm nut. And as a reminder, again, the battery is disconnected and there is no power going to this vehicle at all. So both ends of these battery cables, they're the both same size connector ends. So it doesn't really matter which end you start with. But we are going to install the black cable on the middle post. And the cable itself has a little bit of a bend to it. So we're just going to put it down on there like that. And again, I'm just going to, it's finger tight, just install the nut on there while we run the cables through the body of the chassis. And then we're going to attach our red cable to that bus bar. And again, just finger tight with this nut. You don't have to do this, just an added caution that I like to do. So we're going to go ahead and run the cables. Again, we're just following the main chassis harness. So it actually tucks behind here. Go ahead and route that way. And then again, we're going to follow it down. So it'll be on the driver's side of the voltage regulator. This is the voltage regulator. We'll run down. There's a little bracket down here we got to kind of contend with. And then right there, they're kind of passing through the tunnel. What we just removed, that prop shaft cover. So I'm going to go on the inside of the vehicle and pull those cables through and just kind of work it back and forth and run them down to the battery. So we got our cables coming through here, so we're just going to go ahead and grab them, and we're just following the routing of the main harness, and the main chassis harness runs right here, and that battery is just underneath the driver's seat. So we're going to route them under here. Just like that. We're going to get a little more slack under the hood. And then we got those cables routed to the battery. Again, we're not hooking up these cables at this time. So we're going to go ahead and mount the winch contactor to the frame of the vehicle. The winch contactor is going to be mounted in this location. There's only going to be 2 bolts that's going to hold the winch contactor to the frame. It's going to be this bolt hole here and then that bolt hole there. We're going to mount it on there, and inside the kit we have these screws that are a self-tapper. It's got a little bit of an edge here that's cutting its way through the frame. Again, only 2 locations, and we want to make sure the wiring for the contactor is facing forward. So we'll go ahead and get that started. I'm using a 13mm socket on a 3/8 ratchet to torque these down. You can kind of feel the resistance as it gets through the winch contactor as it's cutting its way through the frame. So I got that one started. I'll go ahead and get this one started also. So go ahead and finish tightening this last bolt up. And again, we don't want to over tighten these. We just want to tighten them up till they bottom out. And that's good right there. So we had and got the winch contactor is mounted to the frame of the vehicle. So we're going to go ahead and install our red and black cables. They're going to go from the winch contactor to the bus bar itself. So on the contactor itself, there are paint markings that color coordinate with the cable wires. So we're going to go ahead and remove the black nut off that black post. And we're just going to loosely put the nut back on. We're not going to tighten it down at this time. You have a little bit of ring terminal right there. You might have to swing that out of your way. And just as an added note, I'm installing these on the contactor like this. You can kind of see the bend in the crimp connection here. That's the way I'm going to install it, and then the rubber boot end always goes to the contactor. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the red post. Again, just loosely at this time. And then what we're going to do is we're going to route these to our bus bar. And previously we just left the nuts on here while we were routing the power cables. You don't have to do that. It's just an added thing I like to do for I don't pull the cable through the frame of the vehicle when I'm routing. So we'll go ahead and remove those nuts, and we're going to go ahead and attach the red cable to the red cable that we just ran previously to the battery. So what I'm going to do is going to put a little service loop into this, take up some of the slack, and then again, the bend is kind of dropping down. I'm going to lay it on there like that onto the red post. Go into the red cable. I'm just going to put that nut back on there, just finger tight at this time. And I'm going to do the same thing with the black one. I'm just going to go ahead and route it, do a little service loop into it. And I'm going to put it on the black stud with the other black cable, and I'm just going to loosely install the nut on there just to keep that cable in place. And what we'll do is we'll come back later towards the end of the install, and we'll go ahead and zip tie these wires right to the frame rail here. There's actually a hole provided actually right in the frame here we can use for our zip tie. And right now what we can do is, since we got these routed the way we want to, we can go ahead and tighten down these two studs, the red one and the black one. Do want to leave ourselves a little space here to get to that yellow stud when we do have to run that yellow cable. So we're going to go ahead and just tighten those down. Again, we don't have to over tighten these, they just need to be snugged up. And you might want to give yourself a little extra room. That way you can get the black cap onto the post. And we'll do the same thing on the black cable. Again, just snug it down. And then we'll go ahead and work these boots back up onto the post. And you might need to use a little needle nose or pliers to work it over. And we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll continue on with the install. All right, so we have the winch mounting bracket here in front of me, and then the bumper. We're going to go ahead and mount the winch mounting bracket onto the front bumper assembly. So this is actually just going to be mounted right here like that. And we're going to be using the bolts that are provided in the kit and a lock washer. The bolt and the lock washer come from the front side of the bumper, just like that. And then the nuts on the back side. And you'll notice there's actually 3 holes per side. We're not using all 3, we're using the bottom and the top one. So we'll do the same process on the other side. And we'll grab the last one and put those in. So there's 2 more fasteners here and here. Those are going to be self-tapping screws. Those are the same self-tapping screws that we use to mount the winch contactor to the frame. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and install those. We'll tighten all this up. You're going to be using a 17 millimeter wrench for the nuts on the back side and a 16 on the bolt head. So we'll go ahead and do that right now. I'm just going to bring these up kind of finger tight. That way this kind of stays in the position while I put the self-tappers in. So here's the front side of the bumper with the winch mounting plate installed. So you'll see the front side, the 4 bolts we sent through. Again, so you got the bolt, the locking washer, and the nut in the back side. And we went ahead and already torqued these to specifications. The 4 here and then the 2 self-tappers up here. So that's done. All right, so our next step here is we're going to go ahead and install the grill that's provided within the winch kit. And we're going to install the fair lead connection. So before I install this auto stop fair lead, we want to make sure that we kind of lift this grill up and kind of tuck the wiring behind it. That way it kind of feeds behind the grill when we go to connect up to the rest of the wiring in the kit. So once that's done, we're going to go ahead and reinstall the front grill here with the T40 screws that we removed earlier. And we'll go ahead and get those started. So once the grill's installed, we're going to go ahead and install the auto stop fair lead onto the grill itself. So included in the kit there are 2 carriage bolts and then some nylon lock nuts. So we're going to go ahead and pass the carriage bolt from the back side, and it's going to pass through the auto stop fair lead, and then our nut goes on the outside here into the fair lead. We're going to go ahead and repeat that process for the other side. And then we're going to go ahead and tighten down the fair lead. You'll have to hold the carriage bolt up for it stays locked into the square hole. And then we'll just bring these down tight. And we'll repeat the process on the other side here. Once that's tight, we can go ahead and come back with the zip tie and just secure the auto stop fair lead wiring to the front metal grill. That way it's not flapping back and forth, or it can potentially rub into the wiring. That way it just secures it nice and tight. So we'll come back, we'll go ahead and fasten that, and we'll move on to the next step. So our next step here is we're actually going to go ahead and install the winch on the winch mounting plate here. And the winch is actually held in place with 4 bolts. The bolts are going to come through the back side of the mounting plate, and then they're going to fasten into the 4 threaded holes in the winch itself. Each of the 4 bolts is going to look like that, and it's going to have a locking washer that goes on first, and then a flat washer, and then those are going to come through the back side of this winch mounting plate. So we're going to go ahead and put the winch into a free spool mode, and we're going to go ahead and pull some of the rope out just to make sure we can feed it through the fair lead before we mount the winch in there. That way we have plenty of room. So I'm just pulling out about 3 feet here. I'm just gonna go ahead and feed that wire, or that cable, might be cable, could be synthetic rope, through the fairlead. Get it pulled through. We're gonna be making sure that the knob is gonna be on the driver's side, not on the passenger side, because our wiring for the winch motor is gonna come down the passenger side of the vehicle. And then we're gonna go ahead and install our fasteners in the back side. And there's 4 of them. They're a 13 millimeter. We'll go ahead and install the other 3, and we'll make sure we torque these to specification. So we went ahead and finished tightening up our 4 fasteners that holds the winch on. So I'm just going to kind of show you those fasteners here. So the 4 right here, these are 13 millimeter. Torque them down the specifications, which we already did. Once that's done, we can go ahead and start by installing the hook onto the synthetic rope. So before we install the rope onto the hook, we need to install our fairlead stop, rubber stopper here. On this stopper here, the word Polaris is actually in black, impressed into the rubber here. We need to make sure we install that correctly. So the word Polaris is going to be facing forward of the vehicle, and we need to thread this rope through here. It can be a little challenging to get that rope through there, so there's a little trick here. If you actually just get like a zip tie and thread it through here, and just enough on there, and then what we'll do is we'll lubricate the rubber stop just with some kind of lubrication. What I'm using is just a bike spray wash. It's a highly concentrated bike wash, so it's fairly easy to slide this through. So we'll just pass the zip tie through the rubber bumper, and then what we want to make sure is we have the rope orientated properly, because there's a slit in here, left or right, or up or down, and we just want to make sure we kind of line that up with our rope. And then we'll grab our zip tie, a little downward pressure on this, and we'll pull that rope right through, just like that. So once that's through, we can go ahead and cut our zip tie, and then we can go ahead and install our hook. So now that we got the rubber stopper through there for the auto fairlead, we can go ahead and install the pin onto the hook, and then hook the rope up to our hook. So that just passes through there, and then we're going to run our pin back through the hook, back through the rope, and then we'll fasten that back in with a cotter pin, and then we'll go ahead and bend that cotter pin over out of the way. Let's grab a pliers. We'll just kind of bend that back. And then I like to come back with a set of pliers, channel lock pliers, slip pliers, and then just go ahead and pinch this. That way it just looks a little more neater, and then it kind of avoids people grabbing the hook and cutting their hand on the cotter pin. So now we can go ahead and install the bumper back onto the vehicle. You may need an assistant to install the bumper onto the vehicle. It is going to be a lot heavier now with the winch installed in place, plus that mounting bracket we installed earlier. So we're going to go install the bumper onto the vehicle. Make sure we lift it up, get it on its mounting post. Looks like we're there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install just a punch, just a locator hole to hold it on one side. If we're going to have one free hand to start my fasteners on one side. So we'll go ahead and start that fastener over here. And just as a reminder, there's 7 fasteners total, 2 on either side, and then 3 across the bottom. So we'll go ahead and go back to the other side. Go ahead and install the bolt here. So I got the 2 bolts on the passenger side and the 2 bolts on the driver's side installed loosely right now. They're not tightened down. So then of course we have the 3 across the bottom that we have to install. So just an added reminder, there is no nuts on the back side of these bolts. So the 3 across the bottom, you're probably going to have to lift up on the bumper a little bit to get the holes to line up. Just a little bit, and get thread started in one of them. And then we can go ahead and tighten it up. Another trick to this too, if you didn't want to do it this way, you could just add a little punch in here to hold it in place, and then install your 2, and then come back and remove your punch, and then reinstall that last bolt in there too. Makes life a little easier. That way you don't got to wrestle with the bumper. So we'll go ahead and finish up installing the rest of these 3 bolts here, tighten everything to specifications, and move on. So we're going to go ahead next and we're going to route the blue and the yellow cables. These are going from the winch contactor down to the winch motor itself. So we're going to go ahead and actually start at the winch contactor. Again, each of the studs on the winch contactor are color coded with a paint mark. So we'll go ahead and install the yellow cable onto the yellow stud here and just loosely install the nut. We don't need to tighten it down at this time. And then we'll do the same thing for the blue cable. And again, what I like to do is I like to install the dip kind of like this, how it drops down onto the stud. Just looks a lot nicer. And we'll put those on there. And what we'll do is we're going to route both these cables. They're going to be routed down across behind the radiator fan, the cooling fan, and then down the right side of the radiator. When we route the wires down to the winch motor is actually color coded. There's a blue and yellow washer on the studs. So it lets us know which connection goes to which cable. So we'll go ahead and make that routing, and then we'll come back up, and then we'll orientate the wires up here at the contactor and then tighten down our studs. So once we get these all tightened up, we'll go ahead and put the rubber protective boots on there. And then what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll go ahead and zip tie this up to make it look nice and neat. We want to ensure that the cables aren't touching the fan shrouding or anything like that. So we'll go ahead and make these connections up here, and then we'll come back and we'll show you the pictures of the zip tying and how it's all orientated. So we went ahead and go ahead and zip tied everything down. You'll see that our service loops here, I went ahead and made a zip tie around the red and black cables to the frame, and then added another zip tie here. And then I went along about every 6 to 8 inches down the cables on the yellow and the blue cable and added a zip tie. And then I added an additional zip tie to the frame just to kind of keep it off the radiator, or cooling fan. And then I zip tied them to the frame here, and then another zip tie down here to kind of keep it all nice and neat and organized. We have additional wiring we're going to be installing to the vehicle, but it's always nice to just continue just kind of keeping it look nice and neat as we go along. So you may notice these still are not tight yet. We're not done with these terminals yet. We still need to hook up some electrical connections to this. So these are not tightened down currently. That's why the rubber boots are not on the terminal studs right now. So we'll continue on. So our next step here is going to be kind of a multi-step here. So we're going to do the control box installation, and we're also going to do the wireless remote receiver installation on top of the wiring. So I'm actually going to start at the wiring first. So kind of walking through this from the contactor. This is the pigtail that comes off the contactor with the green and black wire. Then this goes to the control box, which is the white box in my hand here. And this control box has 4 leads coming off of it. The one that's going to the winch contactor here, and then we have 2 on the other side here, and this side's going to include an orange wire, and it's going to include a black wire with the ring terminal. The orange wire here, I installed a jumper harness that comes with the kit, and this ring terminal now is going to go to the stud here on our terminal block, and I'll show you how to wire that here shortly. The other end here, this wire here, which is another white connector with 2 black wires on it, that's going to go down to our fair lead connector. So I'm going to go ahead and run that down and just make that connection. Back up here, we have that other wire coming off the control box. It's going to a splitter. Got one connection coming in and then 2 connectors coming out. Now, one of these connectors is not going to be used. This would be used if you had a switch on the dash. As you can see here, the green wire is going to one connection and the black wire is going to another connection, so it doesn't matter which lead gets connected to the wireless remote receiver. On the other end, this is going to come off and it's going to go to another black and green connector that's going to our wireless remote receiver. That's going to get mounted here on this side. And I'll show you how to do that. The other wire coming off the wireless remote receiver is going to look very familiar to the wiring that just came off that white control box. We're going to have a ring terminal on a black wire, and we're going to have an orange wire that I put a jumper on that comes in the kit with a ring terminal that's going to go to our bus bar. So that's where all that's going to be hooked up. Our control box is going to be zip tied to the frame in this location here. So what I'll go ahead and do is get everything mounted, the control box and the wireless remote receiver, and we'll come back and we'll give you a picture of how all that looks installed. So the screws that are going in here, these are self-tapping screws. So they're going to take a little work to get started to begin with because they're cutting their threads as they go through the frame. And again, we're just going to snug these up. We don't want to over tighten them. We just want to get them bottomed out. So we're going to go ahead and connect our wiring up for our wireless receiver and our white control box here mounted on the frame. So again, there is two black wires going to ring terminals, and then there's two orange wires on ring terminals with those jumpers that we installed earlier. So just as a reminder, the orange wires are going to go to the top terminal, which is going to be the orange white wire here. That's going to be key switch battery power. So every time the ignition is in the on position, that terminal is going to get power. We are not connecting these to the red terminal, okay, to the red cables. And then of course our black wires are going to go to our black cable, which is our ground or chassis ground, engine ground. So we're going to go ahead and just take these nuts off that we just left loose on there before. And what we want to make sure we do is I always like to sandwich these ring terminals between one of these black cables and the other larger black cable, just because these are a little more robust and they just fit better on there this way, and they sandwich everything nice and tight. And then you'll just have to just spread your ring terminals kind of off to the side, reinstall the nut back on there, and just kind of make sure we get some threads. So we're going to go ahead and tighten this down and just make sure it takes up nice and even. Like I said, you might have to spread out these ring terminals for you get a nice fit. And again, we're not over tightening these, we're just torquing them down until they're snug. You don't want to break off the studs. So that's good there. So we went ahead and already zip tied everything up here on the wiring prior to that. So once that's done, you can go ahead and tighten down the red stud too, since we're in the same location here. So we'll get that buttoned up. Again, just snug is just fine. And then we'll go ahead and get that nut off the orange and white wire. And then we'll connect our orange wires with the ring terminals on the end of that one. And we'll go ahead and reinstall our nut back on there. And I know I've said it again and again, but again, just snug these down, don't over tighten them. And we're good there. So what we'll do next is we'll go ahead and run our boots back over our red and black cable. We'll come back and we'll go ahead and clean up the wiring with our zip ties, and then we'll show you a picture how it's all cleaned up, how it looks nice and neat, and then we'll move on. So right now I'm just going back and just cleaning up the wiring here, just making it look nice and neat and respectable. So we're just kind of cleaning it up a little bit. There's really no right way or wrong way to do this. Important thing here is just to make sure that your wiring isn't interfering with the fan blades on the cooling fan, anything with the steering post, the suspension, the drivetrain, anything that's going to be rotating or possible areas where they could rub through, sharp edges on the frame. But right now we're doing pretty good here, so we're almost done routing everything. I got a few more spots I got to touch up here, and then we'll go show you the inside of the vehicle here, kind of how I routed the main red and black wires through the tunnel back to the battery, and show you how I zip tied that up. So lastly, we're just going to finish up zip tying this wire here. This is going down to our fair lead. So you'll find some holes in the frame here that go ahead and utilize them to secure the wiring. And just make sure it's not on a sharp edge. We're good here. And we'll get one more zip tie right here, just around the front bumper support here, or bracket, just to secure that last connection. We'll tuck that into the frame there, and zip tie it and come back and cut our loose ends off on our zip ties. And we'll move on. So just to kind of show, we routed our power wires that are going back to our battery here, the red and the black ones. You see what I did is I actually zip tied the wire every 6 to 8 inches roughly onto the main harness of the vehicle. You do need to be careful that there is a brake line right here that runs kind of right next to that harness. We do not want to zip tie those power wires to that brake line, and we do not want to obviously zip tie it to the prop shaft of the vehicle because this is a rotating assembly. Once this is all secure, we can go ahead and install the prop shaft cover back on the floor. Just as an added note, there's a little tab right here. The front bulkhead sits between this tab and this piece of plastic here, so it'll sit in this area where my finger is. So we'll go ahead and reinstall that back into place, and we'll use our T40 fasteners. So we just want to make sure that we don't over torque these. They're just going into plastic, so just start them with your, your fingers and then just grab your ratchet. Again, I'm using a T40. And just bring them down snug, and we'll go ahead and finish and installing all the fasteners, and we'll move forward. All right, so now that we got our cables routed down through here, we're going to go ahead and connect our battery back up. Remember, we left the battery bolts and the screws in the battery itself, so we'll go ahead and get those removed. And then we're going to go ahead and connect the battery, but we need to make sure that we do connect the positive cable up first and the ground cable up last. And our vehicle here is actually equipped with a battery tender, so we want to make sure we reinstall the battery tender. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we're tightening our batteries nice and tight here. So just another added note here, you can see our wiring here. If it lays up like this, there is the potential that it's going to be resting on the prop shaft. So we do need to make sure we come back with zip ties and make sure we secure this cabling back down to the main harness, which is down here by the battery. That way there is no possibility that these cables are going to make contact with our prop shaft. So we'll go ahead and add a zip tie around the main harness, just like that. Make sure we get rid of our excess zip tie there. Make sure we get it out of the vehicle. We'll go ahead and reinstall our boot back onto the battery. Next, we can go ahead and reinstall the seat back onto the vehicle. And then go ahead and shut it. Just make sure our seat belts clear the seat. And that's in place. So we're going to go ahead and just shut the hood and make sure it latches all the way down. And then we're going to hook our rubber latches on either side. So we're going to go ahead and show you where the recommended location is for the wireless remote. So the recommended location on this vehicle is actually right here just above the ignition switch. So the remote comes in a little holster here, and in the kit you get a series of these T25 torque screws here. And you just drill an 1/8-inch pilot hole into the dash, making sure that you're not going to run into any wiring harness or anything else behind there. And then we can go ahead and install these screws into the dash, and then we're going to can reinstall the remote back into the holster. So on this vehicle, we're just not going to do it on this vehicle, so we're just going to go ahead and set this aside, but that is the recommended location. So we're going to go ahead and check the winch operation. We're going to go ahead and use the remote, and we're going to push the out button here. And we're going to hold down the in button and see if the magnetic stop makes it to the auto fair lead, and making sure that the winch motor stops running. And it does. So that concludes the installation of the Pro HD 4,500 pound winch with rapid rope technology on this Ranger 500. For additional information, please visit polaris.com/winches or your nearest dealership.